previously on the keys of time.
We now have the keys that are necessary to start to systematically unveil the Bible's chronology. The first two keys revealed the divinely ordained blueprint or framework for time, which governs the progression of God's plan. Keys 1 and 2 basically say that the blueprint is a week of 7 days of 1,000 years each. The next two keys resulted in the discovery of God's redemption chronology, which exists alongside the Bible's actual chronology. Key 3 says, at the end of every Jubilee cycle of 49 actual years, God adds a special 50th year of grace. This must be a measurement in the redemption chronology. Key 4 is the principle of unreckoned time, which says that God does not count times when his people's sin causes his plan of redemption to be suspended. This is convincingly revealed by the 479 completed years recorded in 1 Kings 6:1, which are 131 years short of the actual time. Now, the total times of servitude are also 131 years. So if they are subtracted from the total time, this gives exactly 479 years. The only alternative to this solution is to force the periods in Judges and Acts 13:20, which add up to 610 years, to fit into the 479 years of 1 Kings 6:1. This involves torturing the scriptures. On the other hand, when the key of redemption chronology with its unreckoned times is accepted, there is a perfect harmony of all the stated times. Again, this requires the existence of a separate redemption chronology in which the years out of fellowship are not counted. These latter keys define how time is reckoned on the redemption chronology. They are like counting the number of days of pay owed to an employee. Weekends are not reckoned because work is suspended then, that's key 4. But bank holidays, which are like jubilees, are added as extra days, even though no work was done. Hence they are days of grace. And this corresponds to key number 3. So whereas keys 1 and 2 define the structure of time that governs the redemption chronology, keys 3 and 4 tell us how redemption time, as counted by God, relates to actual time, as counted by man. This is important because the progression of time within God's overall blueprint is according to redemption time, not actual time.
There are altogether 4 70-year periods of judgment of the house of Israel, so it is easy to confuse them. The cause of the first judgment was the idolatry of the whole nation of Israel over a period of 390 years, from the temple's dedication in 1018 BC to 628 BC when Jeremiah began his ministry. At the end of these 390 years, well after the northern nation of Israel had been taken captive by Assyria, Jeremiah began his ministry, and for the 40 years from 628 BC to 588 BC, he warned Judah against idolatry. Also, God told Jeremiah that the 390 years of sin up to 628 BC would result in 70 years of servitude to Babylon. This 70 years of servitude began in 609 BC, when the Assyrian Empire fell to Babylon, and lasted to 539 BC, when Babylon was conquered by the Medo-Persians. The territory of the northern kingdom, now under Assyrian occupation, came under Babylonian rule. Its population had been deported to Mesopotamia by the Assyrians, so it too came under Babylonian rule. Jeremiah had warned the kings of Judah to submit to Babylon. When Judah did not submit, it faced the more severe punishment of captivity and then desolation. So in 607 BC, Nebuchadnezzar came and attacked Jehoiakim, conquered Judah, and took some of its princes captive. One of these was Daniel. This began the second of our 4 70-year periods of judgment, the captivity in Babylon from 607 BC until 537 BC, when Cyrus issued his famous decree and the captives began to return under Zerubbabel. This captivity resulted from the sin of Judah. Because Jehoiakim and the last 2 kings of Judah who followed him, Jehoiachin and Zedekiah, still continued to rebel against Babylon, the level of captivity increased until Nebuchadnezzar began the final siege of Jerusalem in 588 BC, that would result in the third 70-year period of judgment, total captivity and desolation of the land and Jerusalem, from 588 BC until 518 BC, when the Lord told Zechariah that the desolation of the land and Jerusalem had ended. Finally, at the end of 2 more years, the walls of Jerusalem were breached and the temple was destroyed, beginning the 4th 70-year period of judgment, the 70 years of the desolation of the temple, from 586 BC until 516 BC, when the rebuilt temple was dedicated.
Ezekiel's next major vision was on the 5th day of the 6th month, in the 6th year of the exile. That's in Ezekiel 8:1.
And it came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was sitting in my house with the elders of Judah sitting before me, that the hand of the Lord God fell upon me there.
This took place on the 11th of September, 592 BC. The time between these 2 visions was 442 days, just enough time for his 7-day meditation and the 430-day symbolic action. His second vision, which came as soon as he had carried out the instructions of the first vision, continued on the same theme as the first vision, the coming desolating judgment. He saw the Lord and was taken in the Spirit to Jerusalem, and again he saw the glory of God, in Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 2 to 4.
Then I looked, and behold, a likeness as the appearance of a man. From his loins and downward there was the appearance of fire, and from his loins and upward the appearance of brightness, like the appearance of glowing metal. He stretched out the form of a hand and caught me by a lock of my head. And the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven and brought me in the visions of God to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the north gate of the inner court, where the seat of the idol of jealousy, which provokes to jealousy, was located. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was there, like the appearance which I saw in the plain.
The Lord then pointed out to him the cause of the coming judgment, which was idols in the temple itself. That's in verse 5. And in verse 6 it says that these idols will drive me far from my sanctuary.
Then he said to me, Son of man, raise your eyes now toward the north. So I raised my eyes toward the north, and behold, to the north of the altar gate was this idol of jealousy at the entrance. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing, the great abominations which the house of Israel are committing here, so that I would be far from my sanctuary? But yet you will see still greater abominations.
It is the idols, you see, that will cause his glory to leave the temple, leaving it unprotected and ready for the judgment of God. The Lord then showed him more of the idolatry that was going on in the temple, and that's in verses 6 to 17.
And he said to me, "Go in and see the wicked abominations that they are committing here." So I entered and looked, and behold, every form of creeping things and beasts and detestable things, with all the idols of the house of Israel, were carved on the wall all around. Standing in front of them were 70 elders of the house of Israel, with Jazaniah the son of Shaphan standing among them, each man with his censer in his hand, and the fragrance of the cloud of incense rising. Then he said to me, "Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are committing in the dark, each man in the room of his carved images? For they say, 'The Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land.'"
This is the reason God was going to judge them in his anger and not relent, even if they pleaded. And that's what it says in Ezekiel 8:18.
"Therefore I indeed will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not listen to them."
Thus, once it started, the judgment could not be recalled until desolation was accomplished. In Ezekiel 9, he saw the glory of God leave the Holy of Holies and move to the threshold of the temple.
Then the glory of the God of Israel went up from the cherub on which it had been to the threshold of the temple, and he called to the man clothed in linen at whose loins was the writing case.
The chapter indicates that the judgment will start to fall as soon as the glory leaves. In Ezekiel 10, he sees the glory move to the outer east gate of the temple, and again the message is communicated through the scattering of the burning coals that judgment will start to fall once God has left his temple.
When the cherubim departed, they lifted their wings and rose up from the earth in my sight with the wheels beside them. And they stood still at the entrance of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the God of Israel hovered over them.
In Ezekiel 11, he prophesies judgment on the evil leaders for following the ways of the other nations.
Moreover, the Spirit lifted me up and brought me to the east gate of the Lord's house, which faced eastward. And behold, there were 25 men at the entrance of the gate, and among them I saw Jazaniah the son of Azur and Pelatiah the son of Benaiah, leaders of the people. He said to me, "Son of man, these are the men who devise iniquity and give evil advice in this city, who say, 'The time is not near to build houses. This city is the pot, and we are the flesh.' Therefore prophesy against them, Son of man, prophesy."
But God promises that although destruction will come upon the idolaters, there will be an ultimate restoration through the remnant that survive. And that's in Ezekiel 11:13 to 21.
"Therefore say, Thus says the Lord God, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you out of the countries among which you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. When they come there, they will remove all its detestable things and all its abominations from it. And I will give them one heart and put a new spirit within them. And I will take the heart of stone out of their flesh and give them a heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them. Then they will be my people, and I shall be their God."
Then he sees the glory of God finally leave the city to the east and go to the Mount of Olives. And that's in Ezekiel 11:22 and 23.
Then the cherubim lifted up their wings with the wheels beside them, and the glory of the God of Israel hovered with them. The glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood over the mountain which is east of the city.
This actually happened 4 years later, in 588 BC, just before the Babylonians started the final siege. Similarly, in Ezekiel 43, he sees in a vision what will happen in the future when the glory of God will return from the east to fill the millennial temple. Ezekiel's two visions are in perfect agreement. They describe the situation from two viewpoints, the natural and the spiritual. In the first, he sees the coming siege after 430 years of sin, which was the outward sign that the desolating judgment had begun. In the second vision, he sees the glory of God leaving the temple because of the worship of other gods going on, even in his very presence in the temple. This departure of the glory is what initiates the judgment from God's point of view. The city is now wide open for the Babylonians as God's instruments of judgment, for them to come and destroy it. The departure of the glory, the start of the desolation judgment, must have been at the start of the siege in 588 BC, not at its close in 586 BC, when the destruction was completed. This departure of the glory in 588 BC was the end of an era that began when the glory of God filled the temple at its dedication in 1018 BC, exactly 430 years earlier. For 430 years, God's presence was in his temple, and for 430 years, Israel sinned against God by first allowing, and then encouraging, and then giving themselves over to the worship of foreign gods, even in his very presence. Thus, these are Ezekiel's 430 years, which resulted in his glory leaving his temple and the desolation judgment falling through Babylon. So, when did this sin against God's presence in the temple begin? Although Solomon started well by loving God and faithfully building the temple, he also sinned by breaking God's specific instructions to kings given in Deuteronomy chapter 17. First, the king is not to multiply horses. Second, he's not to multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away from God to other gods. And thirdly, he's not to greatly multiply riches for himself.
When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your countrymen you shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves, who is not your countryman. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return that way. He shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself.
By the time the temple was dedicated, Solomon had started breaking all three of these commandments, and he is famous for doing so.
Now Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, and he stationed them in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common as stones in Jerusalem, and he made cedars as plentiful as sycamore trees that are in the lowland.
The most serious sin was his many marriages with foreign women who were worshippers of other gods, something God had expressly forbidden.
Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, "You shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods." Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away.
The first such marriage, early in his reign, was to the daughter of Pharaoh. We read that in 1 Kings 3:1 and 1 Kings 9:16 and 24. And she, this daughter of Pharaoh, then practiced her idolatry even within the holy city of Jerusalem.
Then Solomon formed a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. For Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Giza and burnt it with fire and killed the Canaanites who lived in the city, and had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. As soon as Pharaoh's daughter came up from the city of David to her house which Solomon had built for her, then he built the Millo.
Solomon, aware of her defilement of the holy places of the city of David, built a house for her and relocated her once he had built the temple. And we see that in 2 Chronicles 8:11. Thus, even when the temple was dedicated, Solomon had allowed idolatry to take root at the heart of Israel.
Then Solomon brought Pharaoh's daughter up from the city of David to the house which he had built for her, for he said, "My wife shall not dwell in the house of David, king of Israel, because the places are holy where the ark of the Lord has entered."
From this point, Solomon's spiritual decline rapidly accelerated, as he loved many foreign women, 700 wives, and they then turned his heart after their gods. He ended up even building worship places for them, and we see that in 1 Kings 11, 1-8.
For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus also he did for all his foreign wives, who burnt incense and sacrificed to their gods.
Jewish tradition confirms that this descent into idolatry began once the temple was finished. God became angry with Solomon for this idolatry, especially since he had appeared to him twice to warn him about this very issue. And God announced to him in 1 Kings 11, 9-13, that his judgment was coming down upon his sin. And that judgment was the division of his kingdom after his death.
Now the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not observe what the Lord had commanded. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Because you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you, and will give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem which I have chosen."